Good morning and welcome to the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We gather on this cold morning. By the way, I do think we have more people than it is temperature degrees outside, which is good. So thank you for braving the cold. We gather this morning before Martin Luther King Jr. Day to reflect on unheard voices and on the privilege of story. We've come here to remember what some would prefer that we forget. And we have come here to say aloud what some would prefer remain silent. This is part of the privilege and mission of being a liberal religious institution. This is part of our fellowship's dance with inner depth and outer focus. I'm Scott Yeomans. My pronouns are he and him. I'm joined today by Service Associates Paolo Sparti and Michaela Sievers. Today's music is provided by Tad Coriath, directing the Fellowship Choir. Directing the Fellowship Choir. Julie Morris on piano and Debbie Larson playing percussion. Today's tech team is Herb Axe, Paula Zimmerman, and Charlie Morris, yes. And yes. You are all welcome here today. In all the beauty of languages, cultures, skin tones, shapes, and sizes, all the gifts and challenges that come together in the uniqueness of who you are welcome here. In all the ways that you experience and express gender, and in the beauty that is who you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In all the ways that you make your living and all the places you are from, you are welcome here. With all the traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here today. No matter how long you have been away, nor how soon you will return, or whether you come with laughter or tears in your heart, you are welcome here. You're invited to join us with a curious mind, a loving heart, and a willing spirit. You are welcome here. If you are new here, we are glad you found us and hope that in this community, whether you're in person or virtually on Zoom, you can experience the warmth and love this congregation has to offer. For those on Zoom, please check out the links in the chat to help you get more connected. Those in person can stop by the welcome table in the foyer, and we also have a newcomer form for you on a QR code in the back of the hymnal. If you would like to view the order of service on your phone, we usually have a QR code on a slide, but maybe not today. Hopefully you have an order of service in your hands. Those on Zoom are welcome to stay for casual conversation after the service. Those in person are welcome to coffee hour, warm, hot coffee here in Fellowship Hall. If you're joining on Zoom, feel free to greet one another in the chat, and if you're a newcomer there, do let us know so that we know that you're with us today and can celebrate you. And for those of you in the sanctuary, please take a moment to greet your neighbor. If you have a chalice at home, you may light one with us. And in the chat, for those on Zoom, please let us know where you are by putting in the chat chalice lit in and where you are. And then for everyone, I invite you to say the chalice lighting words while Paolo lights our chalice. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. I'll now sing our bowl a second time, inviting it to draw you deeper into this present moment. Let us return to a story I offered around this time last January, nearly a year ago. We had just released Reverend Lydia from her covenant with us. Reverend Ruth Reinhardt and I were in the pulpit. Was anyone here for that? I see a few of you. Good. I told a story of an imagined future, a time when a congregant hears something about the interim minister canceling coffee hour, and then they raise the alarm and talk to everybody but the hospitality crew who's in charge of coffee or other elected leadership. Well, friends, that time is now. I'm not saying that anyone is spreading a rumor that we're ending coffee hour. That, my friends, is a sacred bean. You are welcome. Rather, I think the anxiety of the world and this liminal time in the transition of our congregation is affecting how we might be relating to one another and how we might be relating to this interim transition. And so I wanted to begin with this reminder today, this invitation to be open to trust, to be willing to trust in your elected leadership, to be open to trusting the transition team appointed by the board, to be willing to reach out to both groups with your curiosities and questions.
Often, history is written by the winners. Sometimes, history is written by social norms and standards of the time. Today, I want to tell you the story of a man named Bayard Rustin. If you've heard of him, that's fantastic. There has recently been interest in bringing his story to light. There is a film titled Rustin, available on Netflix, and a great book titled Lost Prophet, The Life and Times of Bayard Rustin. It was written by historian John D'Amelio, which is where I'm getting most of my information. If you haven't heard of him, it's because he was a pacifist, he was black, and he was gay. And mid-20th century America wouldn't accept that. It wouldn't accept his queerness. Rustin was raised by his grandparents, and he was heavily influenced by his grandmother, who was a Quaker. She accepted him and his sexuality, telling him once when he was caught with a white boy from his class that he should choose his companions wisely, that he needed to find people who had as much to lose as he did. It was likely this acceptance by his family that gave him his grounding for his future. In 1941, Rustin began working for the U.S. chapter of Fellowship for Reconciliation, otherwise known as FOR. This organization was founded in England and Germany by pacifists at the outbreak of World War I. The U.S. chapter started in 1915 and worked to support conscientious objectors, and later they expanded into anti-racism and labor rights. During World War II, Rustin was a conscientious objector, and he was imprisoned for 28 months for his failure to sign up for the Selective Service. While he was incarcerated, he used nonviolent tactics to work towards desegregation in the prisons. But unfortunately, it was dismissed after the discovery of a relationship between him and a fellow inmate. In 1942, Rustin traveled from Louisville, Kentucky to Nashville, Tennessee on a bus. And he made a point to sit in the second row. He refused to move, and he arrived in Nashville still in his seat. But Nashville police were waiting. They beat him, and they took him to the police station. When he stood his ground and refused to be intimidated, they released him because they decided he was crazy. In 1946, Wilson A. Head, a Black World War II veteran, took a trip from Atlanta to D.C. in order to test the recent Supreme Court decision banning segregation on interstate transportation. He arrived safely and physically unharmed, but he was severely harassed. Look this up. They did a lot to him. In 1947, Rustin, in his position at FOR and as treasurer of the Congress for Racial Equality, or CORE, helped organize a larger test of this court decision, where 8 black men and 8 white men traveled to 15 cities in the South. The journey was well planned, and they made a point to publicize each ride. Stanford's King Institute says this journey provided a model for the 1961 Freedom Rides. This demonstrates how the work Rustin was involved in over a decade before helped create the civil rights movement as we know it. In 1953, Rustin was asked to resign his position for FOR after his arrest and conviction on charges related to his homosexuality in Pasadena, California. This conviction kept Rustin out of the spotlight. He was known as an incredible orator and performer. Both he and many others felt his homosexuality and youthful involvement in the Young Communist League would derail the movement's progress. One very important aspect of Rustin's relationship with Dr. King is that when he and Rustin met, Dr. King is described as having only an academic understanding of nonviolence. In his book, De Emilio mentions Rustin recalling that during their initial trip to Birmingham, Alabama, and the King household, he had to warn a friend not to sit on a couple of guns that were laying in a chair. Dr. King and Rustin became close. Rustin was appointed his assistant, and in this position, Rustin helped Dr. King with nonviolent strategy, proofreading, and ghostwriting. And in 1963, when Philip Randolph began to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, he appointed Rustin as deputy director, despite the criticism of many. Within 2 months, they managed to put together the event and brought 200,000 people to the Washington Mall. Now, this man's life was filled with incredible activism. And he accomplished so much. However, I can't help but wonder, how much more could he have done if society had embraced his whole person? If he had not been held back by his homosexuality? And I want you to take a few seconds here to imagine what more he could have accomplished. Now, I want you to take a few more seconds to imagine a more inclusive future and what each of us can do to ensure that it happens.
The best thing about my story is that I am the one who writes it. It is a privilege of lay leadership to be at this podium, tell my story, how I see it, and hopefully be heard. Being heard is not a privilege everyone has. Our society marginalizes people who we perceive as being different or less than. Stories and people within minority groups are underrepresented disproportionately due to those biases. This disparity sabotages our understanding of others, or even getting to hear those stories in the first place. This lends itself to the illusion that there is a single story, leaving out so many chapters, so many people. Historically, the stories of people of color, immigrants, queer or LGBTQ people, trans or non-binary people, and poor people have been edited out, perpetuating the ignorance and bias in our world. This is one danger of a single story and why it is not enough to simply say, I'm not racist, or I'm an ally. We must actually act on the story we tell. I've heard a lot of concern recently for our future, both within this fellowship and as a nation. It seems as if many of us feel stuck inside the story. We are more than our words. We are not printed, stuck on pages, and we are not set in stone. We each get to write our own stories, but more than that, our values, guiding our actions, are how we live out our love, embody our beliefs, and fuel the energy for action. That is what creates our story, our life. There are countless actions each of us can take to stop spinning and spiraling out. Stuck in stories of anxiety and helplessness about what future story will be told. We feel the survival kicking in. Fight, flight, or freeze. Should we go to fill-in-the-blank country? I don't know what to do. Or, I can't believe it's happening again. I'm coping by telling myself to just do the next best thing. Staying here in the present, focusing on what I can do, that is within my realm of control. That's my power. For each of us, this may look different. Writing letters to representatives, attending town halls, showing up to rallies such as the People's March, which unfortunately was very, very cold yesterday and I didn't go. Donating money, writing postcards during elections, The options are endless, but some things are self-limiting, and those are not an option. Please, don't just freeze. To be hopeless dishonors those who go before us. Start small. Let your inner voice tell a story of kindness to yourself and to others. Every step matters. It all adds up. Every story is written one page at a time. My story reflects many privileges: being white, middle class, cisgender, and having this community where I am accepted for my full, authentic self. These advantages allow me to be more in control of my story and my intersectionality as a queer person and a woman within a patriarchy can give one more voice to these marginalized groups through the privileges I do have. But, like Bayard Rustin, many stories are still often unheard, unknown. What are we missing? Who is not being heard? What stories are we telling about ourselves, this fellowship, and the world around us? Words, thoughts, and prayers are not enough. They must guide your actions. Stories shape and are shaped by our behaviors, empowering us to change our own circumstances. With every action, a new page is written. The beautiful thing about the story of our lives is that we are writing it right now.
Now I invite us into our time of community connection, our time of sacred personal sharing. If you're on Zoom and would like to share a joy or concern, please type it into the chat window, sending it to everyone, and later we'll have Michaela read it while Paolo places a stone into the waters on your behalf. If you're in the sanctuary today, I invite you to come up front, share your joy or concern using the microphone, holding it straight out in front of you. And that you can add a stone to the waters or ask Paolo to add a stone on your behalf. And as always, you're welcome to come up in silence and place a stone into the waters. And Paolo, I invite you to place one more stone for all the joys and concerns, hopes and prayers in the silent sanctuaries that remain in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. Normally we might have a pastor.
Each week, we remind ourselves of the abundance of our lives and this community by giving half of our plate away to those organizations that share our values. Today, the half plate is for Boulder County NAACP. BVUUF participates in its Religious Affairs Committee to collaborate with area congregations in the pursuit of racial justice on education, housing, environment, and economic opportunity. Your donations today will lend support for the activities of the chapter, including today's free celebration and reflections on the life of Martin Luther King Jr. at 3 p.m. at the Jewish Community Center in Boulder, and tomorrow's celebration at 10 a.m. at Silver Creek High School in Longmont. You can visit the NAACP Boulder County website for more information. You can text your donation at the number on the screen, or if you're in the fellowship today, please place a donation in the offering plate as it passes. Please give generously, as you so often do.
For the work of this fellowship and of the Boulder NAACP, we accept this, your offerings. Today's reading comes to us as an excerpt from Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed's book, Selma Awakening. In his book, he quotes a sermon by Reverend Leon Harper. He was a former minister just down the road at Jefferson Unitarian Church. And he offered this sermon in June of 1965 after attending our General Assembly, our faith's General Assembly, and before he himself went to Selma. He wrote, or he spoke, "In Boston, there was an essence," in Boston meaning at General Assembly, "there was an essence described as the spirit of Selma, which pervaded the meetings. A quarter, 25% of the active Unitarian Universalist ministers journeyed to Selma or Montgomery last March. The catchphrases, civil rights, human freedom, personal dignity, equality, words which have so easily flowed from the lips of religious liberals, have now taken a feeling tone as well. A feeling tone as well as still possessing their rational and logical meanings of old. It seemed as if the intellectualism of the pulpit and discussion group had broken through a great barrier to the reality of life. And thus, as a religious movement uncovered a greater contact with life where most people actually live it, in the pain, in the struggle, in the ignorance, and yet in hope. In participating in Selma, we as a denomination have found a new lease on life. What is really at issue is much more than the involvement in the civil rights movement. It is a recognition that we are indeed emotional beings, and logic and reason alone do not bring trust or involvement. That we had fallen prey to all the stereotypes of privileged education who no longer know how to communicate with someone of less privileged background. Our religious pronouncements prior to Selma possessed the character of being for or about a particular problem. Now they are with. Now they are with the problem, the people. End quote. That was from Reverend Leon Harper. In Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, I'm imagining many of you are familiar. There's a framework, a monomyth, if you will, of someone hearing a call, going out into the world on an adventure, and then returning, bringing wisdom and gold back with them to their community. The UU ministers who heeded the call from Reverend Dr. King and went to Selma in March of '65 were forever changed by their journey. They joined in solidarity with Black Christian religious leaders, followed them, learned from them, and journeyed with them through pain and misery, and yes, moments of humanity and joy as well. They sang spirituals, felt the full range of emotions embodied in their journey. Living in that moment, the civil rights movement was no longer an intellectual exercise for them, but an embodied reality. The Christians they worked with and followed were no longer superstitious believers to perhaps feel superior to, but real people sharing a passion for love and justice. And then abruptly, these UU ministers returned home to their congregation. Reverend Morrison Reed in his book asks, quote, "How could those who went to Selma take an experience that stood so far outside of the norms of their liberal religious communities, that ran counter to the individualism that was present in Unitarian Universalism then and now, by the way, and offer that to their congregations without putting their ministries at risk. Without putting their ministries at risk? How frustrating it must have been to have experienced that truth, to have lived in full solidarity with Black Christian leaders, only to fear sharing that experience with their congregations back home. From reading Reverend Harper at Jeffco down the street, his revelation that emotional connection to ourselves, to UUs in the movement, and to those whom we are called to serve was part of the gold he brought back from his journey to General Assembly and then from the march. Those phrases, civil rights, human freedom, personal dignity, equality, now carried an emotional energy within him that he and other ministers tried to convey to their congregation despite the blindness of their privilege. In Selma Awakening, Dr. Morrison Reed said that the task of transforming a congregation was more difficult and challenging than marching for civil rights. Hard to believe. So, for example, in 1965, there was a UU Commission on Race and Religion survey that went out to congregations asking them about their response to Selma. How involved were they with what was going on in Selma? And I have two very different responses from that survey. From the First Church in Memphis, Tennessee, their minister, James Madison Barr, said, "We did not support the march in any way. I plan to continue to seek to bring some reason and reality out of the current chaos, to work for the individual dignity of all men, but to oppose the present Martin Luther King Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is breeding a new reconstruction and doing more damage than anything else I can think of." And then in the same state, Tennessee Valley in Knoxville, theirs was actually too long for me to read it in its entirety, but they sent telegrams to President Johnson. They planned a citywide prayer meeting after the death of a UU minister. They circulated a petition asking for voting rights at the federal level, and their minister was part of a delegation to Washington. So the responses were varied. Know that most responses to the survey were very brief and generally in support of the march. I dare say that we as a denomination and a congregation face similar challenges today. We continue to ask ourselves, how can we be with a people and not just for or about a people? How can we be allies and not just bystanders? One of the challenges that Reverend Dr. Morrison Reed brought up again and again in his book was an intellectual superiority in our congregations that discounted emotional expressions of love and following Black Christian leadership. These attitudes would take decades to transform, and I believe we still grapple with some aspects of these today. To be fully with means to surrender some of our desire for control, to let go of thinking that we have all the answers, and instead to listen to those who are most impacted by the situation and follow their leadership and support their needs. For example, BLUE, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, have you heard of this group? They're an organization committed to expanding the power and capacity of Black UUs within our faith. At our annual General Assembly, they and other organizations try to create safe spaces for people of color. Yet even today, there are members of the UUA and even clergy who are not supportive of this organization or of the need for separate spaces. As we continually return from our own heroes' journeys, let us remember that, like a tree planted by the water, love is at the center of our faith. That love and justice walk hand in hand, and that love manifests in human form. Human form, but also human freedom, personal dignity, and equity. And that this love shall not be moved. Tat? Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice. Right. We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, the energy of action. These we carry in our hearts till we meet again. Invite you to join arms or give yourself a hug if you would prefer not to do that. Whoop. Thought I knew it and then didn't know it. As we continually return from our own heroes' journeys, remember that like a tree planted by the water, love is at the center of our faith, that love and justice walk hand in hand, that love manifests in human freedom, personal dignity, and equity for all, and that this love shall not be moved. Amen. Go in peace after you hear the announcements. Tad first.
Oh, okay.
You can stay there.
Thank you. Maybe you have to leave that.
I do.
Oh, good.
Hello, I'm Tad, Director of Music here. One quick announcement for you. I wanted to bring, if you're not aware, we have a concert coming up 2 weeks from yesterday. This gentleman, Francisco Ruiz, he is a fabulous singer, an instrumentalist, an improviser, a jazz artist. So he's coming to share his talents with us. And there's part of what he does is circle song. Some of you may be aware of what that is. It's started, I believe, or at least popularized by Bobby McFerrin, where you just kind of make stuff up on the spot. You teach it to the audience, and have people sing and experiment and move and create all together. And that's kind of like his bread and butter. That's what he loves doing. So he's going to come share that with us. And there's also, he's giving a workshop over at UUCB that same morning, Saturday, February 1st at 10 a.m., where he'll work with it's free. Anybody can, we have meaning of the minds and hearts. Forget I said that. That's not for us. But come to the concert. Thank you, Kelly. And these, grab a flyer. If you want to get a ticket, there's a QR code here. Yes, right.
Good catch, Tad. Okay, elected I'm Mary Hill. I'm a member of the board. Elected representatives from the board, the Committee on Shared Ministry, and the Leadership Development Council will hear your questions and concerns about all BVUUF during coffee hour following the service. We sit up on the dais. I'm going to be the member from the board today. Look for us on the stage in Fellowship Hall, please. There's Meeting of the Minds and Hearts next Saturday on February 1st, 9 to 11:30. And that's really a guiding meeting for this congregation, so please, please come. Join us to begin in our initial crafting of an all-congregation covenant, hear an update of our 3 congregational priorities, and celebrate with a parade of councils. Childcare is available and Zoom participation at the same link used for our Sunday services. Robin, there's something I need for you. I forgot to ask you to come up, will you? Hi.
Who's Robin?
Robin is our board president, and it's her birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Robin. Happy birthday to you. Thank you.
I'm 64.
And I think that's it. So, thank you.
Let's
Thank you.